My name is Tiffany Lawson. I was 38 years old the week I finally understood that love, when mixed with cruelty, is still cruelty. For years, I told myself that some people just didn't know how to express affection properly, that my mother's sharp tongue came from concern, that her constant critiques were simply her way of trying to prepare me for a harsh world. I had been wrong my entire life. But I didn't fully understand that until the week she broke my daughter. My mother, Bridget, had always been a difficult woman. Growing up under her roof felt like living inside a never-ending evaluation. Nothing was ever quite right. My hair was too frizzy, my clothes never flattering enough. My body, according to her, was something that needed constant correction. By the time I left for college, I'd learned how to shrink myself, how to preemptively apologize for existing, how to hear criticism before it was even spoken. And somehow, despite all of that, I convinced myself that she would be different as a grandmother. That was my first mistake. My daughter Sophie was 10 years old then, bright-eyed, loud-laughing, fearless in a way I'd never been allowed to be. She didn't test the waters before jumping in. She leapt first and trusted her heart to catch up. Last spring, she decided she wanted to be a cheerleader. It wasn't about glitter or attention. It was the teamwork she'd seen at a community fair, the synchronized movements, the way the girls lifted each other, literally and emotionally. For 3 months, Sophie lived and breathed cheerleading. Every night, she watched tutorial videos, curled up on the couch, rewinding the same jump over and over until she got it right. She practiced in our backyard until the grass thinned beneath her sneakers. She made up chants in the shower, her voice echoing down the hallway while my husband Greg and I exchanged smiles outside the door. Sophie wasn't naturally graceful. She tripped over invisible cracks in the floor and knocked over her own water glass at dinner more times than I could count. But she had heart, and she had determination. Greg and I supported her completely. We bought her proper shoes, flexible workout clothes, and told her over and over that whether she made the team or not didn't matter. What mattered was that she tried. 2 weeks before tryouts, my phone rang. It was my mother. She asked if she could come stay with us for the week leading up to the tryout. Said she wanted to support Sophie during this big moment. I hesitated. Across the kitchen, Greg caught my expression and silently shook his head. He knew my mother. He'd seen her smile sweetly while slipping verbal knives between ribs. But guilt is a powerful thing. She wants to be involved, I told him later that night. Isn't that what we want? For Sophie to have a relationship with her grandmother? Greg didn't argue. He just looked at me with that quiet sadness that meant he already knew how this would end. I should have listened. The moment Bridget walked through our front door with her oversized suitcase and tight smile, my stomach sank. That look on her face, the one that meant she was already cataloging everything she found lacking. Sophie ran down the stairs and wrapped her arms around her grandmother's waist. "Grandma, I'm so glad you're here. Do you want to see my routine?" Bridget patted her head absently. "Maybe later, dear. Traveling is exhausting." And just like that, the week began. I didn't know yet that I'd just opened the door to something I wouldn't be able to undo. The first cut came so softly, I almost convinced myself it didn't count. It was the morning after Bridget arrived. The house still smelled faintly of her perfume, powdery and sharp, like something meant to mask decay. I came downstairs half awake, hair in a messy bun, still in Greg's old college sweatshirt, expecting to find Sophie eating cereal and rushing through homework the way she always did. Instead, I found them seated across from each other at the kitchen table, like they were in some private interview I hadn't been invited to. Sophie was chattering, words tumbling out of her in that breathless excitement she got when she cared about something. She had a bowl of cereal in front of her, milk already going a little gray at the edges because she'd been talking more than eating. "And then there's this jump called a herky," she said, arms lifting as if she could demonstrate while sitting. "It's hard, but I almost have it. Sometimes I land weird, but Mrs. Morrison said that's normal when you're learning." Bridget cradled her coffee cup in both hands, eyes on Sophie, expression unreadable. She murmured, taking a slow sip. "You know, Sophie, cheerleading is very competitive." Sophie paused, spoon hovering in midair. "I know, but Mrs. Morrison said attitude matters too. Coaches want team spirit. Well, yes, Bridget said, voice smooth as oil. But let's be realistic. The girls who make teams like that usually start young. Gymnastics, dance, years of training. Something in Sophie's face shifted. Tiny, but I saw it. Like a light dimming one notch. I'm working hard, she said quickly, as if her effort could be weighed and measured. Bridget tilted her head. You're starting quite late, aren't you? Most girls your age who are serious have been doing it for at least 3 or 4 years. My coffee mug hit the counter harder than I intended. The sound cracked through the quiet kitchen. Mom, I said, forcing my voice into calm. Sophie is trying something new. That takes courage. We're proud of her for putting herself out there. Bridget looked at me, eyebrows raised like I was being irrational. Of course you're proud, Tiffany, she said. And there it was. My name said like a sigh. I'm just making sure she understands what she's up against. Better to have realistic expectations than to be blindsided by disappointment. Greg appeared in the doorway then, already dressed for work, tie half straightened. He took one look at Sophie's face and then at my mother. She's 10, he said flatly. She doesn't need to be realistic about anything except showing up and doing her best. Bridget's cheeks flushed. You two coddle her. Life isn't going to be kind just because she tries hard. She's learning that lesson all on her own, just by trying out, I said, voice tighter. She doesn't need you to teach it to her in our kitchen. Bridget's mouth pinched, but she said nothing. Sophie stared down at her cereal like the milk had become suddenly fascinating. I told myself that was it. A small moment, a misunderstanding, a line drawn early that Bridget would respect. That was my second mistake. Bridget didn't stop. She just learned to do it when I wasn't looking. It was never one big attack. It was a drip, drip, drip. Little comments delivered with that same casual tone, like she was remarking on the weather. When Sophie practiced in the living room, Bridget watched from the couch and said, "Your arms should be straighter. The girls on TV always have prettier lines." When Sophie showed her a video tutorial, Bridget smiled and said, "Those girls are very slim, aren't they? It helps with the look." When Sophie talked about uniforms, Bridget hummed thoughtfully. Uniforms can be unforgiving. They show everything. At first, Sophie laughed it off. She was still Sophie, still determined, still hopeful. But I started noticing small changes. The way she checked her reflection longer than usual before school. The way her shoulders hunched slightly when she practiced, like she wanted to take up less space. One night, I heard soft thumping from upstairs, well past bedtime. Faint footsteps, the rhythmic impact of jumping. I knocked on her door and pushed it open. Sophie was in her pajamas, hair messy, jumping in place on the carpet. Her tablet was propped against a pillow, tutorial video playing on mute. Her face was tight with concentration, but her eyes looked tired. Too tired. "Honey," I said gently, "what are you doing?" She froze mid-jump, breathing hard. "Just practicing. I messed up the herky earlier. I can't mess up at tryouts." "You don't need to do this right now," I told her, crossing the room and sitting on the edge of her bed. "Your body needs sleep. Your brain needs sleep." Sophie's hands twisted in the hem of her shirt. "Grandma said the other girls probably practice every day." My jaw tightened. "Grandma doesn't know what every other girl does," I said carefully. "And even if they do, you've been working hard for months. That counts." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. I brushed her hair back from her forehead. "Do you want to tell me what's really going on in your head?" Her eyes flicked away. Then, in a voice so small it barely reached me, she asked, "Mom, do you think I'm pretty enough to be a cheerleader?" I felt something inside me crack, clean and sharp, like glass. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my chest ached. "Cheerleading isn't about being pretty. It's about skill and teamwork and spirit. Where did you even get that idea?" Sophie shrugged, blanket already pulled up to her waist like armor. "Grandma said cheerleaders are usually really pretty. She said it's part of the image, and that maybe I should do something else instead, like science club or the school play. A hot wave of rage rose in me, but I swallowed it back because Sophie was watching my face like she was bracing for me to agree. Your grandmother is speaking from her own outdated ideas, I said, slow and firm. Modern cheerleading values all kinds of kids. And you, Sophie, you are beautiful. But more importantly, you're brave, you're determined, you're kind. Those things matter more than anything. She nodded again. But I could see the doubt had already taken root. Downstairs, later that night, Greg and I argued in whispers in our bathroom with the fan running. She needs to leave, he said, jaw tight. She's been here less than a week, and Sophie's already second-guessing everything. I know, I whispered back, pressing my palms against the counter. But if we kick her out now, it'll turn into a war. Sophie's already nervous. She doesn't need to see a screaming match the night before tryouts. And if we let her stay, Greg said, eyes burning, she'll be there tomorrow. She'll do worse. I hated that he was right. I hated that I'd invited this into our home. But I was trapped between two versions of pain. The immediate explosion of confronting my mother, or the slow poison of letting her remain. I chose the one that felt quieter. One more day, I said. We manage her for one more day. We keep her away from Sophie as much as possible. We just get through tryouts. Greg stared at me for a long beat, like he wanted to shake sense into me without actually doing it. Then he exhaled, defeated. Okay, but if she says one more thing, one more, then I'm done being polite. In bed, when Greg fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I tried to tell myself Bridget meant well. I tried to tell myself she was only being honest. But a memory surfaced. Me, at 8 years old, holding up a drawing I'd made, proud and glowing. Bridget's voice in my head. The colors are messy. You should try harder next time. It hadn't been honesty. It had been control. And somewhere upstairs, Sophie shifted in her sleep, and I realized with a sick twist of dread that my mother wasn't just visiting. She was repeating history, using my child as her new canvas, and I had handed her the brush. The morning of tryouts arrived cold and bright, one of those deceptively cheerful autumn days where the sun looks warm, but the air cuts straight through your jacket. Sophie barely touched her breakfast. She pushed scrambled eggs around her plate, staring out the window like she was bracing herself for something inevitable. I recognized that look instantly. I'd worn it myself as a child before piano recitals. Excitement tangled with dread, hope battling fear in your stomach until neither could win. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, I said gently, sliding into the chair beside her. Nobody's going to be disappointed if you decide this isn't for you. Sophie shook her head fast, curls bouncing. No, I want to. I'm just scared I'll forget everything and look stupid. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed down the stairs. Bridget entered the kitchen, already dressed, phone in hand, lips pressed into that familiar thin line. Of course you're nervous, she said lightly. That's perfectly natural when you're trying something you're not quite prepared for. I shot her a warning look, sharp enough to cut glass. She ignored it. Just remember, Bridget continued, voice coated in false warmth. Not making the team isn't the end of the world. Plenty of children try things and fail. It builds character. That's enough, I snapped. Greg came down the stairs, keys already in hand. One look at the room and he knew. Tension clinging to the air like static. Everyone ready? He asked, tone carefully neutral. The drive to the rec center felt endless. Sophie sat in the back seat with her headphones on, but I doubted she was listening to anything. Bridget, from the passenger seat, kept twisting around to offer what she probably thought was helpful advice. Smile constantly, even if you make a mistake, she said, and stand up straight. Slouching makes you look unprofessional. I muttered something under my breath that wasn't suitable for a 10-year-old to hear. Greg reached over and squeezed my hand once, grounding me, reminding me to breathe. The parking lot was packed with minivans and SUVs. Inside the gym, clusters of girls stretched and practiced, many wearing matching warm-up suits that screamed experience. Sophie's face drained of color. Mom, they look like professionals. They're kids, I said quickly, just like you. But my stomach twisted because some of them really did look like they'd been born doing backflips. Inside, the gym buzzed with energy. Music thumping, parents chatting, coaches shouting instructions. Sophie was handed a number to pin to her shirt, 47. She clutched it like it was a lifeline. Greg and I found seats halfway up the bleachers. Bridget sat beside me, arms crossed, eyes already judging. The first group went out. They were Sophie's age, but moved with the confidence of girls who'd been doing this for years. Perfect jumps, perfect smiles. Bridget leaned close. Now those are proper cheerleaders. Please, I said through clenched teeth. Just watch. Sophie watched too, her excitement slowly being replaced by something heavier. When her group was called, she stood, legs visibly shaking. I grabbed her hand. Look at me, I said softly. She turned, tears already shining in her eyes. You worked hard, I told her. You belong here. No matter what happens, your dad and I are proud of you. She nodded, though fear still clung to her face like a shadow. On the mat, Sophie looked small. Purple t-shirt, black shorts, surrounded by girls in coordinated gear. The coach explained the jumps. The music started. Sophie's first jump was shaky. She landed awkwardly, stumbled, and I saw her flush red. But she didn't stop. She adjusted, tried again. Better this time. She's trying so hard, Greg whispered, voice tight. I pulled out my phone to record, wanting Sophie to see later that she wasn't failing the way she thought she was. The cheer portion started, something about school spirit and victory. Sophie's voice rang out clear and strong. Her movements weren't perfect, but her determination was unmistakable. She's doing great, I murmured. That was when Bridget leaned in, loud enough to carry. She's just not pretty enough to be a cheerleader, is she? I mean, look at her compared to the others. I froze. She's got such a round face, Bridget continued calmly, and she's not as thin. That little blonde one, she looks like a cheerleader. Time slowed. I watched Sophie's head snap toward us. She'd heard. Her expression collapsed, concentration melting into shock, then hurt so pure it stole the breath from my lungs. Her eyes filled, her mouth trembled. The other girls kept moving. Sophie stood frozen. What the hell is wrong with you? I hissed, standing abruptly. Bridget looked genuinely surprised. What? I'm just being honest. You just destroyed her, I said, voice shaking with fury. On the mat, the coach stopped the music, concern flashing across her face. Sophie bolted, running straight for the exit. Greg was already moving. He caught her in the hallway, wrapping her up as she sobbed into his chest. I dropped to my knees in front of her. She thinks I'm ugly, Sophie cried. Grandma thinks I'm ugly. No, I said fiercely. That is not true. Not one word of it. But what if she's right, Sophie whispered. What if I don't belong? Greg knelt too, voice breaking. You belong anywhere you choose to stand. The coach came out later. She was doing well, she said gently. The effort was there. The words felt like salt in an open wound. Back in the parking lot, Bridget stood by the car, annoyed. That was dramatic, she said, running off like that. I had never felt rage like that before. White hot and consuming. Get in the car, I told Sophie and Greg. Bridget, you're sitting in the back. The drive home was silent. When we pulled in, Sophie ran inside. Greg turned to my mother. Pack your things, he said calmly. Now. Bridget turned to me. You're going to let him talk to me like this? I didn't answer. Upstairs, Sophie curled on her bed, clutching her old stuffed rabbit. I sat beside her. What Grandma said was wrong, I told her. Cruel. And it says everything about her, not you. Downstairs, a door slammed. Bridget was gone. That night, as Sophie finally fell asleep, my phone buzzed. A text from Bridget. You're overreacting. I blocked her number because some words, once spoken, can never be unheard. And some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The house felt wrong without the sound of Bridget's suitcase wheels scraping across the hardwood. Not peaceful. Not quiet in a good way. Just hollow. Like something toxic had finally been removed, but the air hadn't had time to clear yet. Sophie didn't come downstairs for the rest of the day. She stayed curled up in her room, door half closed, the way kids do when they want comfort but don't quite trust it yet. Greg and I moved through the house carefully, as if any sudden noise might shatter what little stability remained. At dinner, her chair sat empty. I carried a plate upstairs anyway. She was lying on her bed, still clutching that old stuffed rabbit, its ears worn thin from years of love. Seeing her like that, small, folded inward, trying to self-soothe with something from early childhood, nearly broke me. "Can I sit with you?" I asked softly. She nodded without looking at me. I set the plate aside, untouched, and sat on the edge of the bed. "I need you to hear this," I said carefully. "What your grandmother said today was wrong. It was cruel. And it had nothing to do with who you are." Sophie's voice was muffled against the rabbit. "But she said it out loud. Everyone heard." I swallowed hard. "Yes," I admitted, and that was wrong too. Grown-ups are supposed to protect kids, not embarrass them. She failed at that. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Why doesn't she like me?" The question hit harder than any accusation could have. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, reaching out to stroke her hair. "This isn't about liking you. This is about her, about the way she talks to people. She's done it to me my whole life." Sophie finally looked at me then, eyes red-rimmed. "She does it to you too?" "Yes," I said honestly. "She always has." Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, but understanding. The realization that this wasn't a personal failure on her part. Downstairs, voices rose. Greg and Bridget. Even through the walls, I could hear the sharpness in his tone, the brittle edge in hers. I didn't go down. Not yet. Sophie needed me more. After a while, the arguing stopped. A door opened, then closed. A car engine started. Greg appeared in Sophie's doorway a few minutes later. "She's gone," he said quietly. "She took a ride service. She's not coming back." Sophie pushed herself up on her elbows. "Really?" "Really," Greg said, sitting down beside her. "What she said was unforgivable. You are our priority. Always." Sophie didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. "I don't want to see her anymore," she said after a moment. "You don't have to," I told her. "Not now. Not ever if you don't want to." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake replaying everything. The moment in the gym, Sophie's face when she heard those words, the way I'd hesitated for weeks instead of shutting my mother down the first time she crossed a line. My phone buzzed around midnight. Another message from Bridget. "You're blowing this out of proportion. I was trying to protect Sophie from disappointment. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I blocked her. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Sophie withdrew in a way that scared me more than tears ever could. She stopped practicing. The tablet stayed dark. The backyard, once worn down to dirt from her jumps, grew quiet again. But it wasn't just cheerleading. She stopped singing in the shower, stopped doing homework at the kitchen table. She ate less, slept more. Her laughter disappeared like it had never existed. Greg and I tried not to panic, but we talked in low voices at night when Sophie was asleep. "She's not bouncing back," Greg said one evening, staring at the TV without really watching it. "This is more than a bad day." "I know," I said. My chest felt tight all the time now, like I was holding my breath indefinitely. I think we should look into therapy." Saying it out loud made it real. The next morning, I started making calls. Bridget didn't disappear quietly. When she realized I'd blocked her number, she started calling from other phones, friends, burner apps, numbers I didn't recognize. I blocked every one. She sent letters. I threw them away unopened. Once, she sent flowers. Sophie saw them on the porch before I could intercept. "They're from her, aren't they?" she asked flatly. "Yes," I said. "I don't want them." I threw them in the trash, still wrapped in cellophane. 2 weeks later, my sister Lauren called. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. "Mom says you're refusing to talk to her and keeping Sophie from her." "Did she tell you what she said to Sophie?" I asked. A pause. "She said there was a misunderstanding, that Sophie got upset and you blamed Mom for it." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. I told Lauren everything, word for word. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. "Jesus," she said finally, "that's really bad." "Yes," I said, "it is." "But she's still your mother," Lauren said cautiously, "and Sophie's grandmother. Cutting her off completely feels extreme. She humiliated my daughter in front of a room full of strangers, I said, voice steady now. And she'd been tearing her down for weeks before that. When I confronted her, she called me dramatic. So no, Lauren, I'm not taking this too far. I'm finally doing what I should have done years ago. Lauren sighed. This is going to cause a rift. Holidays are coming. Are you really planning to skip Thanksgiving? Christmas? If Bridget is there, I said, then yes. She'll never agree to not come. Then we won't be there. After I hung up, Greg pulled me into a hug. You did the right thing, he said into my hair. Then why does it feel so awful? I asked. Because protecting your child sometimes means disappointing everyone else, he said. And that hurts. A week later, Sophie had her first appointment with Dr. Brennan, a child therapist who specialized in emotional trauma. During a parent session, I tried to minimize it. It was just comments, I said weakly. She didn't hit her or anything. Dr. Brennan looked at me gently. Emotional abuse is still abuse, and often it's more damaging because the wounds are invisible. The word abuse landed like a weight. What your mother did, Dr. Brennan continued, was systematically erode Sophie's self-esteem, culminating in public humiliation. That's textbook. I cried in the car afterward. For Sophie, for myself, for the little girl I used to be, standing in front of my own mother, shrinking under words I'd been told were normal. At home, Greg and I changed how we spoke to Sophie, praising effort, kindness, curiosity, never appearance, never comparison. Small steps. Slow healing. But every night, as I tucked her in, I wondered if I'd acted too late, if some part of that damage would always remain. Because once a child learns to see herself through someone else's cruelty, it takes a long time to unlearn it. Therapy didn't fix things overnight. I wish I could say that Sophie walked into Dr. Brennan's office and walked out lighter, healed, whole again. But real healing doesn't work like that. It moved slowly, in inches instead of miles. And some days it felt like we weren't moving at all. At first, Sophie barely spoke. She sat curled into the corner of the couch in Dr. Brennan's softly lit office, knees pulled to her chest, fingers worrying at the seam of a throw pillow. When Dr. Brennan asked gentle questions, Sophie answered with shrugs or single words. I don't know. Maybe. It's fine. Nothing was fine. At home, we tried to keep things normal, without pretending nothing had happened. Greg cooked her favorite meals. I sat beside her while she did homework, even when she barely looked up. We praised her for things that had nothing to do with performance or appearance. Thank you for helping your brother. I love how curious you are. That was really kind. Dr. Brennan told us consistency mattered more than intensity. That rebuilding self-esteem was like rebuilding a house after a fire. You didn't just paint over the damage. You checked the foundation. Meanwhile, the rest of the family was unraveling. My brother called first. Mom's not doing well, he said. She's crying all the time, barely eating. I closed my eyes. Has she apologized? Well, she says she didn't mean it the way Sophie took it. That's not an apology, I said. You're punishing her, he snapped. She's old school. She doesn't filter herself. That's just how she is. That's exactly the problem, I replied. That's how she is, and I'm done letting it hurt my child. He accused me of being dramatic, of overreacting, of tearing the family apart. I hung up shaking. Not from doubt, but from rage. Because for the first time in my life, I could see the pattern clearly. Bridget hurt people. Then she minimized it. Then she played the victim. And the family rushed in to comfort her. That was the cycle. And I was done participating. Sophie slowly began to open up in therapy. One afternoon, she came out of a session quieter than usual. On the drive home, she stared out the window, tracing shapes in the fog on the glass. Dr. Brennan says what Grandma did wasn't my fault, she said finally. That's right, I said softly. She says it had to do with Grandma's issues, not me. I felt my throat tighten. She's right. Sophie was quiet again, then asked, why would Grandma say something like that if it wasn't true? I thought carefully before answering. Because sometimes people feel powerful when they make others feel small, I said. And sometimes they don't even realize they're doing it. Sophie nodded slowly, absorbing that in a way only children can, direct, unfiltered. A few days later, she surprised me. I was making breakfast when she came downstairs in pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. She poured herself orange juice and sat at the table like she had something important to say. "I want to talk about Grandma Bridget," she said. I turned off the stove. "Okay." "Dr. Brennan says I get to decide if I want to see her again," Sophie continued, eyes fixed on the table. "That it's my choice." "That's true," I said, heart pounding. "I don't want to see her," Sophie said clearly. "Not for a long time. Maybe not ever." The clarity in her voice stunned me. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She was firm. "I support that completely," I said. "And so does Dad." Greg, standing in the doorway, nodded. 100%. Something in Sophie's shoulders relaxed. For the first time since the tryout, she smiled. A small one, but real. Breaking my silence felt necessary after that. I called Bridget. I kept my voice calm, rehearsed, steady. "Sophie has decided she doesn't want contact right now," I said. "We're respecting that." Bridget exploded. "You're poisoning her against me," she snapped. "She's a child. She doesn't get to make decisions like this." "In this case, she does," I replied. "And if you can't respect that, we're done." A week later, she showed up at our house unannounced. I didn't open the door fully, kept the chain on. "You can't keep my granddaughter from me," she said, face flushed. "I have rights." "You don't," I said calmly. "And if you show up again without being invited, I'll call the police." Her expression shifted, from anger to calculation. "You're overreacting," she said again. "You always were sensitive." I leaned closer to the gap in the door. "This ends now." I closed the door while she was still speaking. Thanksgiving came and went. We stayed home. We made our own meal. Sophie laughed at her brother's terrible jokes. She asked for seconds. It was the first time in weeks I'd seen genuine joy on her face. And I realized something then, something I wish I'd understood decades earlier. Protecting your child doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like empty chairs at holiday tables. Sometimes it looks like being called difficult, dramatic, ungrateful. Sometimes it looks like finally calling abuse what it is and refusing to dress it up as love ever again. The first real sign that something inside Sophie was healing came quietly, not with laughter, not with confidence, but with boundaries. It happened on a Tuesday morning in late January, the kind where the sky hangs low and gray and everyone moves a little slower. I was packing lunches when Sophie came downstairs, already dressed for school, backpack slung over one shoulder. She stopped at the kitchen table. "Mom," she said, "Grandma Bridget tried to talk to me at school yesterday." My hands froze around a sandwich bag. "What?" I said, too quickly. "She didn't come inside," Sophie clarified. "She was across the street. I saw her when I was getting into the carpool." A familiar, cold rage slid into my chest. "What did she do?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay level. "She waved," Sophie said, "and mouthed my name." I looked away. I crouched in front of her immediately, gripping her shoulders just enough to feel her solid beneath my hands. "Did she say anything? Did she come closer?" Sophie shook her head. "No," and I didn't wave back. I exhaled slowly. "How did that make you feel?" She thought about it. Really thought. "Uncomfortable," she said finally, "but also kind of strong." Strong. That word echoed in my head all day. I called the school as soon as I dropped Sophie off and updated them, again, that Bridget was not an approved contact. The counselor reassured me they would keep an eye out. That afternoon, I told Greg. "That's it," he said without hesitation. "If she shows up again, we escalate." And for once, I didn't feel torn. I felt resolved. That night in therapy, Sophie told Dr. Brennan what had happened. I sat in on the last 10 minutes, watching my daughter explain it with a clarity that made my chest ache. "I didn't feel bad," Sophie said. "I used to feel bad when Grandma was sad, like it was my job to fix it. But now I don't." Dr. Brennan nodded slowly. "That's a very important realization." Sophie glanced at me. "Is that okay?" "Yes," I said immediately. "That's more than okay." On the drive home, Sophie stared out the window, then said, Dr. Brennan says sometimes adults don't like it when kids grow spines. I laughed despite myself. She's not wrong. Bridget didn't like it at all. 2 weeks later, she tried again, this time by ambush. I came home from work to find her car parked across the street from our house. She stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, like she'd been waiting. I felt my pulse spike, but I didn't panic. I parked, got out, and locked my car. "Tiffany," she said sharply, "we need to talk." "No," I replied calmly, "we don't." "You don't get to decide that," she snapped. "I absolutely do," I said, "and you need to leave." She scoffed. "You're really going to keep my granddaughter from me forever?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You don't get access to Sophie until you take responsibility for what you did. And even then, contact is her choice. She's a child. And she's a human being," I said, "not your emotional supply." Her eyes narrowed. "You always were dramatic," she said. "You turned out fine." I laughed once, short and humorless. "No," I said. "I survived. Those are not the same thing." She opened her mouth to respond. "If you don't leave," I continued evenly, "I'm calling the police. This is your only warning." She stared at me for a long moment, disbelief giving way to fury. Then she got in her car and drove away. My hands were shaking by the time I went inside, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline mixed with something else. Pride. That night, Sophie watched me carefully as I tucked her in. "She came again, didn't she?" Sophie asked. "Yes," I said honestly. Sophie nodded. "Did you stop her?" "Yes." "Good," she said simply, and rolled over. No guilt, no second guessing, just relief. That weekend, something unexpected happened. Sophie pulled out her old cheer shoes. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I just watched quietly from the doorway as she set them on the floor, laces neatly tucked inside. Later, she sat next to me on the couch. "There's another tryout," she said, voice careful, "for the spring recreational league." My heart jumped, but I didn't show it. "That's true," I said. "I saw the flyer." "I want to try again," she said quickly, then added, "Not because Grandma was wrong, but because I don't want her to be the reason I stop wanting things." I blinked hard. "That's very brave," I said. She shrugged. "Dr. Brennan says taking back power means choosing what I want, even if I'm scared." Greg, who'd been pretending not to listen from the kitchen, turned around. "There's no pressure," he said. "None." "I know," Sophie said. "I still want to." That night, after Sophie went to bed, Greg wrapped an arm around me. "She's different," he said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "She's stronger. And you are too," he added. I thought about that as I lay in bed later, about how Sophie had learned something in months that took me decades. That love doesn't require endurance of harm. That family doesn't get a free pass to hurt you. That even children are allowed to say no, especially children. I fell asleep knowing something fundamental had shifted in our house, not because the danger was gone, but because we finally knew how to face it together. The weeks leading up to the spring tryout felt different, not easier, not carefree, but steadier. Sophie practiced again, but this time it wasn't frantic or obsessive. There were no late-night jumps on the carpet, no tearful meltdowns over imperfect landings. She practiced with intention, focus, ownership. Twice a week, Greg drove her to sessions with a private coach, a woman named Marisol, who believed in correcting technique without breaking spirits. I stayed out of it as much as I could. That was part of what Dr. Brennan recommended. "This has to belong to Sophie," she told us. "Not to fear, not to revenge, not to anyone else's approval." So I watched from the edges. I noticed how Sophie asked questions now instead of apologizing. How she stopped when she was tired instead of pushing through pain. How she laughed when she messed up instead of shrinking. The flyer for the tryout sat on our fridge for weeks. March, Spring Recreational League, open to beginners. The night before, Sophie laid out her clothes on her bed, careful, deliberate. No rushing, no panic. "Win or lose," she said as I tucked her in, "I'm proud of myself for trying again." I kissed her forehead. "So am I." The day of the tryout arrived bright and warm. The kind of spring day that makes you believe in second chances. The rec center parking lot was half as full as the fall tryout had been. Inside, the atmosphere felt lighter. Less pressure, more laughter. Sophie stretched with the other girls, chatting softly. No matching warm-ups, no obvious hierarchies. Just kids. Greg squeezed my hand in the bleachers. "She looks ready," he said. "She is," I replied, and I meant it. When Sophie's group was called, she walked onto the mat with her head up, not stiff, not frozen, grounded. The coach demonstrated the jumps. Sophie watched closely. The music started. Her first jump was solid. Not perfect, but confident. Her second was better. By the third, she was smiling, real smiling. During the cheer portion, her voice rang out strong and clear. No hesitation, no searching the bleachers for approval. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. Greg leaned close. "She's doing it." "Yes," I whispered. "She really is." When Sophie came off the mat, she ran straight to us, not crying, not shaking. "I did it," she said breathlessly. "I didn't freeze. I didn't quit." I wrapped her in my arms. "You were incredible." "I don't even care what happens," she added, grinning. "I'm just glad I didn't let Grandma stop me." That was the victory. Not the list posted later, not the coach's nod, not the applause. But this moment, where fear no longer had the final say. A week later, an email arrived. Sophie made the team. She screamed so loud our neighbors probably heard. Greg lifted her off the ground. I laughed and cried at the same time. That night, Sophie taped the acceptance letter to her wall. Not front and center, just there, like proof. Bridget tried one last time after that. A voicemail from an unknown number. "I hear Sophie made the team," she said. I always knew she could if she tried. I deleted it without responding. Because credit without accountability isn't love. Spring practices filled our calendar. New friendships, new routines. Sophie still had hard days. Healing isn't linear. But she no longer asked if she was pretty enough. She asked if she was strong enough. And the answer every time was yes. One evening, as I watched her practice in the backyard again, grass wearing thin beneath her feet, I realized something had changed in me too. I no longer flinched at the thought of family holidays missed. I no longer doubted the boundaries we'd drawn. I'd chosen my daughter. And in doing so, I'd chosen myself. Because the truth is, some people don't deserve front row seats to your child's life. Some traditions need to end for healthier ones to begin. And sometimes, the bravest thing a parent can do is believe their child, even when it means walking away from their own past. Sophie landed her jump cleanly, threw her arms up, and laughed. She waved back, confident, unafraid, exactly where she belonged.